The letter that condemned Anaya to a fortune was delivered on a Tuesday. The same day the eviction notice was taped to her door, its fluorescent orange screaming a louder, more immediate truth than the crisp, cream-colored. Then came the letter, bearing the seal of a law firm in a town she'd never heard of, informing her that she, Anaya Grace Thompson, was the sole heir to the estate of a man she'd never met, her great-great-uncle Silas Salty Thompson. The estate consisted of a single asset, a defunct, flooded salt mine in the arid heart of Utah, a property so worthless it was officially classified as a liability. It was a curse, a final, cosmic joke. She had inherited a hole in the ground filled with salt water and debt, and in a hidden, crystallized chamber deep within that cursed earth, a treasure worth $518 million was waiting to drown her. If you're ready for a story that will take you deep into the earth and even deeper into the human heart, hit that subscribe button. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Anaya read the letter again, the stiff paper trembling in her hand. The legal jargon was a thicket of thorns: testamentary disposition, fiduciary duty. Encumbrances and liens, the words meant nothing and everything. They were the sound of a distant train, either coming to rescue her or to run her down. Leo, his small face smudged with chocolate from a stolen breakfast cookie, looked up from his worn picture book. "Is it from Santa, Mommy?" he asked, his voice a pure, hopeful chime in the cramped, silent apartment. She forced a smile, folding the letter and tucking it into her pocket, where it felt as heavy as a stone. "Something like that, baby," she whispered, stroking his hair. The eviction notice was still on the door, a glaring orange sun promising a bleak dawn. The mine was a joke, a cruel punchline to a life already filled with them.
Offloaded salt mine.
What was she supposed to do with that? Bottle the water and sell it as artisanal brine? The lawyer on the phone, a Mr. Abernathy with a voice as dry as dust, had been clear. The property carried significant back taxes. The state had placed liens on it. There were environmental cleanup assessments pending. "Frankly, Miss Thompson," he'd said, his tone a carefully measured pour of pity, "most people in your position would simply refuse the inheritance. Let the state seize it. It is, for all intents and purposes, a financial burden." But Anaya had heard something else in his voice, a flicker of something held back, a professional caution that bordered on warning. It was the same tone doctors used before delivering bad news, a sterile buffer against the coming pain. She couldn't refuse it. As irrational as it felt, refusing it felt like surrender, like admitting that the universe was right, that she was destined for nothing but the struggle. This inheritance, this cursed, waterlogged pit, was the first thing in her life that was entirely hers. The eviction notice was a ticking clock. She had 30 days. 30 days to find a new home, a new deposit, a new thread of hope, or she could face this absurdity head-on. She looked at the return address on the envelope, Jericho, Utah, a place that sounded like an ending. Maybe, just maybe, it could be a beginning. That night, with Leo asleep in his small bed, his breath a soft rhythm against the city's distant sirens, Anaya sat at her small kitchen table and spread out the contents of the package Abernathy had sent. It was a thin file, containing a deed from 1923, a geological survey from the 1950s showing the mine's layout, and a single, sepia-toned photograph. In the photo, a man stood before the mine's entrance, a dark maw in a pale, rocky hillside. He was tall and wiry, his face weathered into a mask of grim determination, his eyes holding the same deep, tired fire she sometimes saw in her own reflection. His skin was dark, a stark contrast to the pale dust on his clothes. This was Silas Salty Thompson, her ancestor. He wasn't smiling. He looked like a man guarding a secret or a tomb. There was a story here, a story that had been waiting in the dark for 100 years. Anaya felt a strange pull, a sense of connection to this ghost in the photograph. He had worked this land, breathed this air. He had left her. This problem, this mystery, this curse. She looked again at the eviction notice, then at the photograph. One was a certainty, a wall she was hurtling towards. The other was a door, locked and buried, but a door nonetheless. She had nothing to lose but the chains she was already wearing. With a resolve that felt both terrifying and liberating, she bought 2 one-way bus tickets to a place that barely existed on a map. She was going to Jericho, Utah. She was going to stand at the mouth of that dark hole and see for herself what kind of legacy, what kind of curse, had been waiting for her family in the salt and the silence. The bus ride to Jericho was a slow bleed of color from the world. The vibrant, chaotic green of the city faded to the muted tans and browns of the suburbs, which in turn gave way to the endless, bleached canvas of the desert. For 3 days, Anaya and Leo lived in a state of suspended animation, the drone of the engine a constant hum beneath the surface of their lives. Leo, with the infinite resilience of a child, saw it as a grand adventure, pressing his face against the glass and narrating the passage of every lonely gas station and skeletal tree. Anaya saw it as a retreat, a long, drawn-out surrender to the inevitable. She was running toward a problem, not away from one, a fact that felt like a profound failure of logic. The money she'd spent on the tickets was her entire security deposit fund, a gamble made out of desperation and a sliver of irrational hope. When they finally stepped off the bus in Jericho, the heat hit them like a physical blow. It was less a town and more a suggestion of one, a handful of sun-scorched buildings huddled together against the vast, indifferent expanse of the salt flats. The air was thin and tasted of dust and salt. Silence was the primary resident here, a heavy, ancient silence that swallowed the sound of their footsteps. Mr. Abernathy's office was the only 2-story building on the main street, its brick facade faded to a pale, fleshy pink. The man himself was older than his voice, a small, bird-like man lost in a suit that seemed a size too large. He peered at Anaya over his spectacles, his expression a mixture of professional sympathy and undisguised curiosity. "Ms. Thompson," he said, gesturing to a worn leather chair. "I must admit, I am surprised to see you." He slid a thick stack of papers across his desk. It was the file on the mine, thicker than the one he'd mailed. It was filled with warnings, geological reports detailing subsidence risks, environmental citations for brine leakage, and letters from the county tax assessor that grew more threatening with each passing year. "The debt is considerable," Abernathy said, tapping a manicured finger on the topmost page. $74,000 in back taxes and penalties. The county will auction it off in 90 days if it's not settled. The number hung in the air, as fantastical and out of reach as $1 billion. $74,000 to keep a flooded hole in the ground. Anaya felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. "Is there anything of value there?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Equipment? Mineral rights that someone might buy?" Abernathy shook his head slowly. The equipment was sold for scrap in the 70s. The mine was considered tapped out by 1940. Your great-great-uncle, he didn't operate it. He just held it, lived on the property in a small shack, paid the taxes for 50 years until he couldn't anymore. People around here said he was eccentric. Guarding it, guarding what? Anaya thought. A pit of worthless salt water? "There's one other thing," Abernathy said, leaning forward. He lowered his voice, as if sharing a confidence. "There are local legends, stories about your uncle. They say the mine is haunted, cursed. That old Silas was protecting the town from something in there." Anaya stared at him. A ghost story was the last thing she needed. She needed a miracle, not a campfire tale. She left the office with a heavy box of her ancestors' personal effects, the legal minimum the firm had to keep. It contained mostly junk. Old clothes that smelled of dust and mothballs, a few chipped plates, and a collection of yellow geology textbooks. Defeated, she found the town's only motel, a row of peeling turquoise doors under a buzzing neon sign that promised color TV. She paid for one night, the cash feeling like sand slipping through her fingers. That evening, as Leo slept, Anaya sat on the edge of the lumpy bed and sifted through the box one last time. At the very bottom, beneath a threadbare blanket, her fingers closed around a hard, leather-bound book. It was a journal. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the handwriting was clear, a strong, deliberate script. It was Silas Thompson's journal. She opened it, and the first entry, dated June 4, 1923, sent a chill through the dry desert air. Bought the deed today. They think I am a fool buying a dead mine. They don't know what sleeps in the salt. They must never know. I am not its owner. I am its keeper. Anaya's heart pounded. This was not the rambling of an eccentric old man. This was the voice of a sentinel, a guardian. The words had weight, a purpose that had echoed silently for a century. The next day, she used the last of her cash to hire a rusty pickup truck from the gas station attendant. With Leo strapped into the passenger seat, a bag of sandwiches and water beside him, she followed the faded directions from the deed. The road dissolved from cracked pavement to gravel, and then to a dirt track that wound up into the low, barren hills. The landscape was brutal, carved by wind and time into shapes that looked like sleeping giants. And then she saw it. The head frame of the mine, a skeletal silhouette against the pale blue sky, just like in the photograph. The shack Silas had lived in was still standing, though the roof had partially collapsed, its timbers like the ribs of a desiccated carcass. A faded, hand-painted sign hung crookedly from a post near the mine entrance. Keep out. Property of S. Thompson. Danger. The mine itself was a gaping mouth in the hillside, boarded up with thick, weathered planks. A heavy chain and a rust-eaten padlock held them in place. Below the entrance, a steady, sluggish trickle of reddish-brown water oozed from a fissure in the rock, staining the ground and leaving a crust of white salt in its wake. This was it, her inheritance, her curse. As she stood there, the vast silence of the desert pressing in on her, a voice startled her from behind. You must be the kin. An old man emerged from the shadow of a rock outcropping. He was as weathered as the landscape, his skin a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes a startlingly pale blue. He held a gnarled walking stick. Name's Elias, he said, his voice a low rumble. Knew your uncle. Knew him well. Anaya introduced herself, her voice tight. Did you know him? At the end? Elias nodded, his gaze fixed on the boarded-up entrance. He made me promise. If anyone ever came, anyone with his blood, I was to tell them his words. He took a step closer, his pale eyes locking onto hers. He said to tell you, the salt remembers. It remembers the pressure. It remembers the dark. And it remembers the debt. He said you'd understand what it meant when the time was right. The salt remembers the debt. The words seemed to hang in the shimmering heat, imbued with a significance she couldn't yet grasp. Elias looked from her to the mine, a sad, knowing look on his face. He wasn't guarding a treasure, miss. He was caging a monster. That water, it ain't natural. The pressure down below builds up. The whole place is a time bomb. Best thing you can do is walk away. Just like everyone else did, he turned and walked away, his figure slowly shrinking against the immense backdrop of the desert, leaving Anaya alone with the silent mine, the cryptic warning, and the suffocating weight of a legacy she was only beginning to comprehend. The debt wasn't just the $74,000. It was something older, deeper, and infinitely more terrifying. The first step in confronting a monster is to look it in the eye. For Anaya, that meant opening the mine. Elias's warning echoed in her mind, a counterpoint to the quiet desperation that was now her constant companion. She had 2 weeks before the money from her last paycheck ran out. 2 weeks before she and Leo would be truly destitute in a town that was little more than a ghost. The memory of the eviction notice was a spur, driving her forward against all logic. She spent a day in Jericho's tiny library, a single room attached to the town hall, poring over microfiche records of the local newspaper. She found what she was looking for, articles from the 1920s about the Jericho salt mine. It had been a boom-and-bust operation, notorious for its dangerous conditions. There were reports of tunnel collapses, gas pockets, and, most frequently, flooding. The mine was a labyrinth that fought back. The company that owned it had gone bankrupt, and Silas Thompson, a former miner, had bought it for a pittance at a public auction. The consensus at the time, according to the smudged print, was that he was a sentimental fool. No one mentioned a curse or a monster. That part of the story lived only in the town's memory, passed down by people like Elias. She found the gas station owner who'd rented her the truck, a wiry man named Chet with grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands. She asked him if he knew anyone who could pump out a mine. Chet laughed, a short, barking sound. Pump out the old Thompson place? Lady, you'd be pumping out the whole aquifer. That thing's connected to every underground spring for 100 miles. It's a fool's errand. I just need to see the upper levels. Anaya insisted, trying to keep the pleading out of her voice. I need to know what's there before the county takes it. He looked at her, then at Leo, who was quietly drawing in the dust with a stick. A flicker of sympathy crossed his face. All right, he sighed, wiping his hands on a rag. There's a generator and a submersible pump I keep for draining flash floods. I'll rent it to you, but I'm telling you, it's like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. The next morning, Anaya drove the rumbling pickup back to the mine, the generator and pump rattling in the truck bed. The first task was the padlock. It was an ancient, formidable beast of rusted iron. She spent an hour attacking it with a crowbar and a hammer from the truck's tool kit, the sharp clang of metal on metal a profane intrusion into the desert's profound silence. Sweat poured down her face, plastering her hair to her temples. Each jarring impact was a release of frustration, of fear, of the pent-up rage at a world that had given her so little. Finally, with a groan of protesting metal, the shackle snapped. The chain fell away. Working with the crowbar, she pried the thick planks from the entrance. One by one, the screech of nails being pulled from dry would setting her teeth on edge. When the last board came free, a wave of cool, damp air washed over her, carrying a scent she had never encountered before. The smell of ancient, undisturbed darkness, of wet rock, and of salt so concentrated it was acrid, almost metallic. It smelled like the deep earth's blood. Leo, who had been watching from the safety of the truck, came to stand beside her. He peered into the blackness. Is this our new home, Mommy? He asked. Anaya's heart clenched. No, baby. This is just a place we have to look at. The mine shaft descended at a steep angle, rough-hewn steps cut into the rock. A thick, slimy layer of brine coated every surface, glistening in the beam of her flashlight. The water began about 20 feet down, a still, black mirror that reflected the beam back at her. It was impossible to tell how deep it was. Setting up the pump was a clumsy, exhausting process. She wrestled the heavy generator into place, her muscles screaming in protest. She ran the hoses down into the shaft until the pump was submerged in the inky water. When she finally pulled the cord on the generator, it sputtered to life with a deafening roar, shattering the silence. The hose shuddered, and then a torrent of rust-colored water began to gush from its end, pouring out onto the salt-crusted ground. For hours, the generator roared and the pump worked. The sun beat down, and Anaya sat in the shade of the truck, watching the water level in the shaft slowly, almost imperceptibly, drop. Elias had been right. It was like draining the ocean. The water pouring out was a constant, powerful stream, yet the level inside only receded by inches. By late afternoon, it had dropped enough to expose the top of a tunnel leading off from the main shaft. It was a start. She shut off the generator, and the sudden return of silence was almost as jarring as the noise had been. She equipped herself with a headlamp, a coil of rope tied around her waist and secured to the truck's bumper, and a heavy-duty flashlight. Kissing Leo and telling him to stay put and shout if he saw anyone, she took a deep breath and began her descent. The steps were treacherous, coated in a slippery film of algae and salt. The air grew colder with every step, the dampness seeping into her clothes. The beam of her headlamp cut a small, nervous circle in the immense darkness. When she reached the bottom step, she was standing on a narrow ledge, the black water lapping just inches below her boots. The tunnel was directly in front of her. It was low and narrow, shored up with rotting timbers that were weeping beads of brackish water. She swept her flashlight beam into its depths. The tunnel ran straight for about 50 feet before ending in what looked like a solid wall of rock. A dead end. Her heart sank. All this work, all this risk, for nothing. She took a tentative step into the tunnel, the water sloshing around her ankles. The air was thick, heavy, making it hard to breathe. The silence in here was different from the silence of the desert. It was a crushing, claustrophobic silence, the weight of 1,000,000 tons of rock pressing down from above. She made her way to the end, her light playing over the rock face. It was a collapse. A massive pile of rubble and debris completely blocked the way forward. She ran her hand over the damp rock, a profound sense of despair washing over her. Chet was right. Elias was right. Abernathy was right. This place was a tomb, a liability, a dead end in every sense of the word. There was nothing here but debt and danger. As she stood there, defeated, her light caught something on the tunnel floor, half submerged in the muddy water. It wasn't a rock. It was a small metal object. She bent down and picked it up. It was a miner's lunch pail, rusted but intact. Her breath caught in her throat. She pried open the corroded clasps. Inside, protected from the water by the tight seal, was not a meal, but a small oilskin-wrapped packet. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped it. It was a small, leather-bound notebook, smaller than the journal. A field book. And tucked inside the front cover was a folded, hand-drawn map. It showed the main shaft she had just descended, the tunnel she was standing in. But it also showed something else. A dotted line branched off from this tunnel, leading to a section labeled Sealed Passage, and beyond that, a large, circular chamber, with a single, cryptic notation written in her ancestor's hand. The heart. This wasn't a map of a collapse. It was a map of a concealment. Silas hadn't found a dead end. He had made one. The discovery of the map shifted something inside Anaya. The despair that had been a cold, heavy stone in her stomach was replaced by a fragile, fluttering thing. A sense of purpose. This was no longer a fool's errand. It was a treasure hunt, a mission to uncover a secret 100 years in the making. The map was a message sent across time, from her ancestor's hand to hers. But it was a message written in a language of rock and darkness that she did not understand. She needed a translator, a guide. She needed Elias. She found him sitting on a bench in front of Jericho's general store, carving a piece of wood with a small, sharp knife. He watched her approach, his pale eyes giving nothing away. Anaya unfolded the delicate, brittle map on the bench between them. "His field book," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It was in the first tunnel. He sealed it off. On purpose, Elias stopped carving." He stared at the map for a long time, his weathered face unreadable. He traced the dotted line with a calloused finger, his touch surprisingly gentle. "The heart," he murmured, reading the notation. He finally looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw something beyond his gruff, cautionary exterior. She saw a deep, weary sadness. "I was a boy when he was an old man," Elias began, his voice low and gravelly. "My father worked in that mine before Silas bought it. He told me stories, said there was a section they were warned to stay away from, a place where the salt was different. Singing salt, they called it. Said it hummed in the dark. Most thought it was just the rock settling. But the old-timers, the Paiute miners, they said it was the earth spirit." He paused, looking out at the shimmering heat rising from the asphalt. Silas believed them. After the big collapse in 22 that killed 5 men, the company went bust. Silas bought the claim. Everyone thought he was crazy. But he wasn't trying to mine salt. He was trying to bury a secret. He tapped the map again. "This sealed passage, he did that himself. Controlled blast. He told my father he was putting a door on a sacred place. To keep the greedy out, he spent the rest of his life as its gatekeeper." Anaya felt a profound connection to the man in the photograph, this silent sentinel. He hadn't left her a burden. He had left her a key and a responsibility. "The debt," she said. The words Elias had quoted to her coming back with new meaning. "The salt remembers the debt." What did he mean? Elias looked at her, his eyes serious. "The 5 men who died. Their families got nothing. The company vanished overnight. Silas, he tried to help them, gave them what little he had. But he always said the mine itself owed them. that the wealth it held was tainted by their loss. He said if the heart was ever opened, the debt had to be paid first. Not just to the families but to the land itself. To heal the wound, the weight of this revelation settled on Anaya. This was about more than money. It was about justice, about a century-old promise. For the first time, the $74,000 tax bill seemed small, manageable. It was just the first part of a much larger debt. "Can you help me?" she asked Elias. "I need to find this passage. I need to see what he was protecting." Elias was silent for a long time, his gaze distant. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Your ancestor was a good man, a man of principle. I see the same fire in your eyes. But I'm an old man. My back is shot. I can't go down there. But I can tell you who can." He directed her to a small, dusty workshop on the edge of town, belonging to a man named Ben Carter. Ben was a third-generation miner, a geologist by training who now made a living doing contract work for larger companies, blasting, surveying, and reclamation. He was a quiet, powerful man with kind eyes and hands as strong and steady as rock. Anaya showed him the map. She told him the story. He listened patiently, his expression skeptical at first, then intrigued. He examined the map, tapping the notation. "This geology doesn't make sense for a salt dome," he said, more to himself than to her. "This chamber, it's almost perfectly spherical. That's not a natural formation. Not unless—" His voice trailed off. "Unless what?" Anaya pressed. He looked up at her. "Unless it's a geode. A massive, hollow cavity lined with crystals. I've seen them in quartz and amethyst the size of a car. But in a salt deposit, the size indicated on this map, it would be unprecedented. Geologically impossible, I'd have said." He agreed to help, his professional curiosity overriding his caution. His price was fair, a percentage of whatever they found, if anything. If they found nothing, she owed him nothing but the cost of the materials. The next day, they descended together. Ben moved through the mine with an easy, practiced confidence that calmed Anaya's nerves. He tapped the walls, listened to the sounds, read the rock like a language. Using the map and his own instruments, he pinpointed the location of the sealed passage. It was exactly where Silas's map indicated, hidden behind the deliberate rockfall. "He did a masterful job," Ben said, his voice filled with professional respect as he examined the collapse. "He brought this section of the tunnel down without compromising the main shaft. He knew exactly what he was doing. The work was slow and arduous. Ben used pry bars, drills, and small, precise explosive charges to break up the larger boulders. For 3 days, they worked in the cold, damp darkness. The only sounds the scrape of metal on rock, the whine of the drill, and the muffled crump of the charges. Anaya worked alongside him, hauling away buckets of rubble, her body aching with a fatigue so deep it felt like it was in her bones. She was driven by a single, burning image, the eviction notice on her apartment door. This mine was her only way out, her only path to a life where she and Leo weren't constantly one step away from disaster. On the 3rd day, Ben's drill suddenly broke through. A faint, whistling sound came from the small hole, the sound of air pressure equalizing. He pulled the drill back, and a strange, cold draft flowed from the opening. It carried the same acrid, metallic scent as the mine's entrance, but amplified, purer. There was something else, too. A low, resonant hum, a vibration so deep she felt it in her teeth. The singing salt, it was real. Working carefully, they widened the opening until it was large enough to squeeze through. Ben went first. Anaya held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, his voice, tight with disbelief, echoed from the other side. "Anaya, you need to see this. You are not going to believe this." She scrambled through the opening, scraping her hands on the rough rock, and emerged into a vast, dark space. Ben was standing a few feet away, his headlamp beam pointed upwards, lost in the immensity of the cavern. Anaya raised her own light, and the breath left her body in a single silent gasp. This was not a mine. This was a cathedral. They were standing at the edge of a colossal spherical cavern, a geode so immense it defied all geological logic. The air was cold, still, and hummed with a palpable energy that made the hairs on Anaya's arms stand on end. But it was the walls, the ceiling, the floor. It was the very substance of the chamber itself that stole her breath and silenced her thoughts. It was lined, everywhere, with perfectly formed, cubic crystals of halite, the mineral name for rock salt. But these were unlike any salt crystals she had ever seen or imagined. They were enormous, some as large as refrigerators. Their facets so perfectly flat and clear they acted like mirrors, fracturing and reflecting the beams of their headlamps into a dizzying, crystalline forest of light. The scale was impossible to process. It was a place of sublime, terrifying geometry, a secret heart of the earth that had been sleeping in perfect, crystalline silence for millions of years. And then Ben switched off his headlamp. "Wait," he whispered, his voice hushed with reverence. For a moment, they were plunged into absolute, primordial blackness, a darkness so profound it felt solid. And then, slowly, impossibly, the cavern began to glow. A soft, internal luminescence emanated from the giant crystals, a pale, blue-white light that seemed to breathe, to pulse with a slow, steady rhythm, like a sleeping heart. The light grew, not in intensity, but in clarity, revealing the full, staggering majesty of the chamber. It was like standing inside a star. The light wasn't reflected. It was generated from within the crystalline lattice itself. It was cold, silent, and utterly beautiful. Anaya could only stare, her mind stripped of words, filled with a sense of awe so profound it bordered on fear. This was what Silas Thompson had found. This was what he had hidden. This was the heart. Bioluminescence. Anaya finally managed to whisper, the sound ridiculously small in the vast, glowing space. "No," Ben said, his voice trembling slightly. "Bioluminescence is organic. This is something else. Piezo-luminescence, maybe? The crystals are responding to the immense geological pressure around them, converting that force into light. I've read about it in labs with synthetic materials. But on this scale, in nature, it's impossible. It's a scientific miracle." They spent hours inside, moving slowly, cautiously, as if in a sacred space. The floor was a mosaic of smaller, interlocking crystals. The air vibrated with the low hum, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Anaya reached out and touched one of the giant crystals. It was cool and smooth as glass, yet it felt alive, thrumming with a deep, ancient energy. In that moment, she understood Silas's reverence. This place wasn't just a geological anomaly. It felt sentient, sacred. This was not a resource to be exploited. It was a wonder to be protected. The journey back to the surface was a strange, dreamlike transition from a world of impossible light to the mundane glare of the desert sun. They sealed the entrance to the passage again, hiding their work, restoring the illusion of a simple collapse. They didn't speak much. There were no words adequate for what they had seen. Back in Jericho, Ben made some calls. He contacted a trusted colleague at a university, a mineralogist renowned for her discretion. He sent her a small, broken fragment of one of the crystals they had brought back, describing it only as a unique halite sample from an undisclosed location. He didn't mention the light. That was a secret too dangerous to share, even with a trusted expert. The initial report came back a week later. The crystal was chemically sodium chloride salt, but its crystalline structure was flawless, a level of perfection that simply did not exist in nature. More than that, it contained trace isotopes of elements that were incredibly rare, elements used in high-tech applications like quantum computing and advanced energy storage. These trace elements, the mineralogist speculated, were likely responsible for its unique structural integrity. She estimated the value of the raw material, based on the purity and the trace elements, at an astronomical figure. Ben sat Anaya down in his workshop, the desert sun casting long shadows through the dusty windows. He looked at her, his face serious, the weight of what he was about to say pressing down on him. "Anaya," he began, his voice steady. The preliminary, and I mean very conservative, valuation of the crystalline material in that chamber, assuming we could even extract it without destroying it, is $518 million. The number was so large it was meaningless. It was an abstraction, a string of sounds that her brain refused to assemble into a coherent concept. 518 million. She thought of the eviction notice. She thought of the $2 box of macaroni and cheese she and Leo had shared for dinner the night before. She thought of the constant, grinding anxiety that had been her life's soundtrack. The number was a bomb that detonated in the quiet room, shattering her reality. She didn't feel joy. She didn't feel relief. She felt a terrifying, crushing wave of vertigo, as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff. The money wasn't a solution. It was a new kind of danger, a force of nature more powerful and unpredictable than the flooded mine itself. It was the monster Elias had spoken of, and it was no longer caged. She looked at Ben, her eyes wide with a fear he immediately recognized. "What do I do now?" she whispered. He shook his head, his expression grim. "I don't know, but we have to be very, very careful. A discovery of this magnitude doesn't stay secret for long. And the kind of people who deal in this amount of money, they don't play by the rules." The weight of her inheritance had finally settled. It was not the mine, not the debt, not even the crystals. It was the secret, and she was now its sole keeper, just as Silas had been. The $518 million wasn't a fortune. It was a target on her back. The secret, as Ben predicted, did not remain a secret for long. It began not as a roar, but as a whisper. The mineralogist Ben had contacted, despite her reputation for discretion, shared the unusual isotopic data with a colleague in a private research forum. The data was anonymized, stripped of its origin, presented as a theoretical curiosity. But in the small, insular world of advanced materials science, it was the equivalent of a flare fired in the dead of night. Within weeks, the whispers reached the ears of an entity that specialized in turning theoretical curiosities into tangible, monetizable assets: the Geocorp conglomerate. Geocorp was not a company so much as a sovereign corporate state, with divisions in deep earth mining, energy, and proprietary technologies. They were known for their aggressive, often ruthless, acquisition of unique geological resources. They didn't knock on doors. They kicked them down with teams of lawyers and geologists. The first sign of their interest was a man who appeared in Jericho, dressed in a crisp gray suit that seemed to repel the desert dust. He introduced himself to Mr. Abernathy as a representative of a real estate investment firm, expressing a casual interest in acquiring distressed properties in the county. He asked about the old Thompson mine. Abernathy, legally bound to his client, was evasive. The man in the suit smiled, left a business card with an offer to buy the property for $100,000, enough to cover the back taxes with a small profit, and then he vanished. The offer was a probe, a baited hook. Anaya, advised by a suddenly very nervous Mr. Abernathy, refused. 2 days later, a geological survey team from a Geocorp subsidiary arrived in Jericho. They didn't ask for permission. Citing an old and obscure state law regarding mineral exploration rights, they set up equipment on the public land adjacent to the mine. They began conducting seismic resonance tests, firing percussive charges into the ground and reading the echoes. They were mapping the underground, searching for the anomaly, for the impossible chamber the data had promised them. Anaya and Ben watched from the entrance to the mine, a sick feeling of dread growing in their stomachs. They were like two people standing on a beach, watching a tsunami form on the horizon. "They know," Ben said, his voice grim. "They don't know exactly where or what it is, but they know it's here." That offer wasn't a real offer. It was a test, to see if you knew what you had. By refusing, you confirmed it for them. The pressure began to mount. A second offer arrived, this time directly from Geocorp's legal department. It was for $1 million. It came with a thick, intimidating contract and a deadline of 48 hours. It was a life-changing amount of money, a sum that would have seemed like a fairy tale just a month ago. For a fleeting, desperate moment, Anaya considered it. She could take the million, disappear with Leo, and live a life of comfort and security. The thought was a seductive poison. She could be free of the mine, of the secret, of the crushing responsibility. But then she thought of Silas's journal. She thought of his words. I am not its owner. I am its keeper. She thought of the debt to the land and to the men who had died there. To sell would be a betrayal of everything her ancestor had stood for. It would be selling a sacred place to the very people he had sealed it to protect it from. She let the deadline pass in silence. Geocorp's response was swift and brutal. A lawsuit was filed. They claimed that their preliminary surveys indicated a significant mineral deposit that extended beyond the boundaries of her property and onto the adjacent public land. They petitioned the court for the right to conduct exploratory drilling on her land to verify their claim. It was a legal fiction, a battering ram designed to force her into submission. Mr. Abernathy, a small-town lawyer accustomed to wills and property disputes, was completely out of his depth. Their legal team is an army, he told Anaya, his voice strained. They'll bury us in motions and injunctions. They can keep this tied up in court for years, bleeding you dry until you have no choice but to sell. The weight of the battle was suffocating. Anaya felt herself shrinking, becoming the small, powerless woman she had been before the letter arrived. The world was once again a place of closing doors. Only now the doors were being slammed shut by forces she couldn't possibly fight. She retreated to the one place she felt a sliver of peace, her ancestors' dilapidated shack. She needed to feel close to him, to draw strength from his memory. She sat on the dusty floor, rereading his journal, searching for an answer, a path forward. The later entries were filled with a growing sense of melancholy and foreboding. He wrote about the changing world, about the rise of corporations that saw the earth not as a living thing, but as a resource to be consumed. One passage, written in a shaky hand near the end of his life, stood out. The light in the salt is a seed. In the right hands, it could grow a new kind of future. In the wrong hands, it will be a weapon. They will want to possess it, to control it, to turn its beauty into power. But its true value is not in what it is, but in what it can inspire. It must be shared, not owned. It must be a beacon, not a prize, a beacon, not a prize. The words resonated deep within her. Silas hadn't just been protecting the chamber. He had been preserving a possibility, a hope for a better way. To sell it to Geocorp would be to extinguish that hope forever. As she sat there, the setting sun casting long, orange fingers of light through the collapsed roof, Leo ran in from outside. He had been playing near the mine, exploring the tailings piles like they were mountains. "Mommy, look what I found!" he exclaimed, his face flushed with excitement. He held out his hand. In his palm was a small, flat, rusted piece of metal. It was a dog tag, the kind miners used for identification. The name stamped into it was faint but legible, A. Rossi. Anaya's blood ran cold. She remembered the newspaper articles she'd read in the library. Rossi was one of the 5 men who had died in the 1922 collapse. Leo had found a ghost. Holding the small piece of metal, Anaya suddenly understood the true nature of the debt Elias had spoken of. It wasn't just about money. It was about memory. It was about acknowledging the human cost buried in the foundation of this place. This discovery, this small token of a life lost, solidified her resolve. This was not her fortune to sell. Geocorp could not have it. She was not just fighting for a hole in the ground anymore. She was fighting for the dead. She was fighting for a legacy. She was fighting for the future Silas had envisioned. She stood up, the dog tag clutched in her hand. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce, burning clarity. She knew what she had to do. She wasn't going to sell. She wasn't going to run. She was going to change the rules of the game. Anaya walked into Ben Carter's workshop the next morning with a new kind of energy. The fear was still present, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was now fuel, not an anchor. She placed the rusted dog tag on his workbench. "Hey, Rossi," she said. One of the 5 Ben picked it up, his expression somber. "The debt," he said, understanding immediately. "Exactly," Anaya replied. "Geocorp thinks this is about mineral rights and property lines. They're wrong. This is about history. This is about justice. She took a deep breath. Silas wrote that the chamber should be a beacon, not a prize. He wanted it to be shared. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to give it away. Ben looked at her, his eyebrows raised in question. Give it away? To who? If you just hand it over to a university or the government, Geocorp will use its influence to take control one way or another. We're not giving it to them, Anaya said, a plan beginning to form in her mind, a plan born from her ancestors' words and her own fierce desire to protect her son's future. We're going to create something new, a foundation, the Thompson-Rossi Foundation, in honor of my ancestor and the men who died. The idea was audacious, almost reckless. She had no money, no power, no influence. All she had was a secret worth $500 million that she couldn't touch and a lawsuit from a corporate giant. But the idea felt right. It felt true to the legacy she had inherited. The Foundation's purpose won't be to mine the crystals, she explained, the words coming faster now. It will be to preserve the chamber, to study it, to use the knowledge gained from it for the public good, not for corporate profit. The light, the energy, the unique properties. It's a scientific Rosetta Stone. We'll turn the mine into a world-class research institute. And how do you plan to fund this? Ben asked, playing devil's advocate. How do you fight Geocorp's army of lawyers with no money? With the one thing they don't have, Anaya said, a slow smile spreading across her face. The truth. And a better story. Their first step was to go on the offensive. With Mr. Abernathy's help, they reached out to a pro bono environmental law firm, one known for taking on corporate Goliaths. Anaya's story was compelling. A single mother, a descendant of one of the mine's original black miners, fighting to honor a family legacy against a predatory corporation. The story of the 5 miners who died, and the debt Silas felt towards them, added a powerful layer of historical injustice. The key, however, was the chamber itself. They needed to reveal its existence, but on their own terms. Anaya, Ben, and a small, trusted team from the law firm arranged a private viewing. They brought in 2 people, a world-renowned geologist with an unimpeachable reputation, and a journalist from a major national news outlet known for her in-depth, investigative reporting. They signed ironclad non-disclosure agreements. Anaya led them down into the darkness, through the rubble of the sealed passage, and into the glowing heart of the earth. The reaction was exactly what she had hoped for. The geologist was left speechless, weeping at the sheer, impossible beauty and scientific significance of the chamber. The journalist, a hardened cynic who had seen everything, simply stood in the pulsing blue light, her notebook forgotten in her hand, and whispered, "My God." The story broke a week later. It was a bombshell. The front-page article wasn't about a massive mineral deposit. It was about the discovery of a new wonder of the world. It was about the Cathedral of Light, a place of breathtaking beauty and unparalleled scientific importance. The article told Anaya's story, framing her not as a property owner, but as a steward. It told the story of Silas "Salty" Thompson, the prescient guardian who had protected this natural marvel for a century. And it told the story of the 5 miners, their memory now tied to the preservation of this sacred place. The narrative had been flipped. Geocorp was no longer a corporation seeking to claim a resource. They were villains trying to destroy a world treasure for profit. The public outcry was immediate and immense. Save the Cathedral of Light became a rallying cry. Environmental groups, scientific organizations, and historical societies threw their support behind Anaya. The story of a black single mother standing up to a corporate giant to protect a legacy of sacrifice and wonder was irresistible. Geocorp was caught completely off guard. Their lawsuit, which had seemed like a powerful weapon, now made them look like bullies. Their stock price dipped. Their PR department scrambled to do damage control, but it was too late. Anaya had told a better story. While the public battle raged, Anaya focused on the private one. With the help of the law firm, she began the painstaking process of tracking down the descendants of the other 4 miners who had died alongside Rossi. It was a difficult search, a journey through century-old records and faded family histories. She found them scattered across the country. A great-granddaughter in Oregon, a grandson in Chicago, a family in Florida who had never even known how their ancestor had died. She told them the story. She told them about the debt Silas had felt, and the foundation she wanted to create in their ancestors' names. She offered them seats on the foundation's board. They would not receive a financial windfall, but their family's sacrifice would be honored, their names forever linked to the preservation of a miracle. One by one, they agreed. The Thompson-Rossi Foundation became the Thompson-Rossi-Millerchon-Garcia Foundation. The debt was being repaid, not with money, but with honor and memory. GeoCorp, facing a PR nightmare and a united front of descendants, tried one last tactic. They sent a new representative, a woman with a deceptively warm smile and eyes as cold as a winter sky. She met Anaya in Mr. Abernathy's dusty office. She didn't make threats. She made a final, staggering offer. $50 million, Ms. Thompson, she said, her voice smooth as silk. Tax-free. Placed in a trust for you and your son. You'll never have to worry about money again for the rest of your life. All you have to do is sign over the land and walk away. Let us deal with the foundation, the preservation. We'll even name a wing of the research facility after you. It was the ultimate temptation. $50 million. It was a life of ease, of security. A world away from eviction notices and double shifts. Anaya thought of Leo. She could give him everything she'd never had. But then she looked past the woman, out the window, at the harsh, beautiful desert landscape that had become her home. She thought of the cool, pulsing light of the chamber. She thought of Silas, standing guard for 50 years. She thought of the 5 names, now etched not just on a foundation charter, but on her heart. She had inherited something far more valuable than $518 million. She had inherited a purpose. She met the woman's cold gaze with her own, now steady and clear. My ancestor didn't seal that chamber to protect a commodity, Anaya said, her voice quiet but unshakable. He sealed it to protect an idea, the idea that some things in this world aren't for sale. This land is not for sale. This legacy is not for sale, the woman's smile faltered. For the first time, she looked uncertain. She had come to negotiate a price, but she was in a room with someone who was no longer trading in that currency. Anaya had found a different kind of wealth, a wealth that GeoCorp could not understand and could not take from her. The final confrontation with GeoCorp did not end in a dramatic courtroom showdown, but with the quiet, inexorable turning of the tide of public opinion. Faced with mounting legal fees, a damaged reputation, and a story that had cast them as the unambiguous villains, the conglomerate quietly withdrew its lawsuit. They issued a public statement pledging their support for the independent scientific preservation of the Jericho geode, a transparent attempt to save face. It was a silent, stunning victory. Anaya stood on the hill overlooking the mine, the deed to the property now free and clear in her name, the $74,000 tax debt paid off by a flood of small donations from supporters around the world who had been moved by her story. The silence of the desert no longer felt oppressive. It felt peaceful. It was the sound of a battle won, of a promise kept. The creation of the foundation was a monumental task. Anaya, along with Ben, Elias, the descendants of the miners, and a board of respected scientists and philanthropists, worked tirelessly. The initial funding came from grants, from academic institutions, and from wealthy donors who wanted their names associated with the wonder of the world. The first order of business was to honor the debt. A memorial was erected near the mine's entrance, a simple, elegant spire of polished black granite bearing the 5 names: Rossi, Miller, Chan, Garcia, Thompson. Not Silas, but his father, who had also worked and struggled in the dark tunnels. It was a monument not just to the dead, but to all those whose labor had been forgotten. The foundation broke ground on a state-of-the-art research facility, built into the hillside near the mine. It was designed to be minimally invasive, a model of sustainable architecture that respected the stark beauty of the landscape. It would be a place where scientists from around the world could come to study the chamber, which was now officially known as the Silas T. Chamber, without disturbing its delicate environment. Access to the chamber itself was severely restricted. A series of airlocks and clean rooms were constructed to prevent contamination. No material was ever to be removed. The The Foundation's charter, which Anaya herself had helped to write, was clear. The chamber was a library, not a quarry. Its value was in its secrets, not its substance. Anaya's life transformed, but not in the way she had once imagined. She did not buy a mansion or a fleet of luxury cars. She bought a small, comfortable house in Jericho, with a yard where Leo could play. She no longer had to work double shifts at the diner. Her new job was as the executive director of the foundation, a position for which she was paid a modest but comfortable salary. Her days were filled with meetings, with planning, with overseeing the birth of a new scientific institution. It was a different kind of exhaustion, the satisfying ache of building something that would last. One evening, a year after the foundation's establishment, she stood with Leo on the observation deck of the nearly completed research facility. The sun was setting, painting the desert in hues of orange and purple. Below them, lights twinkled on in the new buildings. It was a beacon just as Silas had envisioned. Leo, now older, his face losing its round, childish softness, pointed towards the old skeletal headframe of the mine, which had been preserved as a historical monument. "Is that where the magic is, Mommy?" he asked. Anaya smiled, pulling him close. "Yes, baby," she said, her voice soft. "The magic is down there. And it's up here, too." She thought of the long, strange journey that had brought her here. The eviction notice, the bus ride, the descent into the cold, wet darkness. She had come to this place seeking a fortune, a way out of a desperate life. She had found something infinitely more valuable. She had found a legacy, a community, and a purpose that resonated with the deep, silent hum of the earth itself. The true inheritance had not been the glowing crystals in their silent, subterranean cathedral. It was the strength she had discovered within herself, the strength to face down fear, to resist temptation, and to fight for something bigger than her own survival. It was the understanding that the greatest wealth is not what you own, but what you protect. It is the knowledge that a single, determined voice, speaking a story of truth and justice, can be brighter and more powerful than any light hidden in the darkness. The curse had been a blessing in disguise, a difficult, dangerous path that had led her not to riches, but to grace. As darkness fell over the desert, a soft, pale blue glow became visible from a protected scientific viewport aimed deep into the earth. A steady, rhythmic pulse from the heart of the mine, a silent testament to the man who had kept it secret, and to the woman who had shared it with the world. It was a light that would now shine for generations, a beacon of wonder, a reminder of a debt paid, and a promise fulfilled.